Okay, well, welcome back to part 3 of our tutorial for making a face-like object in ArtMatic. What I'm going to do in this part of the tutorial really is just show you how to do some nice things, just extra little additive things. You've got a basic face here, but we can actually do, well, obviously we can do a lot of things, but there are just some basic extra things that we can do here to make it more interesting. And I'll also show you another really great trick, which is using constrained mutation to create variations in your image without having complete utter chaos inside the system, so that you can use constrained mutation to your advantage to quickly rip through lots of different variations of what you're working on and see if you can find some really nice useful additions to what you're doing. But first of all, I'm just going to go back to the eyes in this system. You remember these three components control the eyes, the main face and the mouth. So I'm going to just select this compiled tree, and we're going to look back in here. And what I'd like to do in this particular case is I'm just going to show you a little bit about how the mixers work to give you different variations of color and density in these systems. What you'll find is as these systems become more and more complicated, different parts of the system can have similar effects, and you can find that you get amplification of something, or you might find that something is working against something else that you're doing. You really have to only experiment to find these things out. For instance, I think I showed you before, in this little mixer here, what we're doing is we're just actually changing the balance between the eye sockets and the eyes themselves. Remember, we made the eyes, these ones here are the eyes and the pupils, and this one is the eye socket. We do this on the other mixer here. You'll see this is a different mixer. This is an additive mixer. This is just a crossfade. The different mixers are here. So this is a packed RGB crossfade, which just does exactly what it says. It crossfades between two RGB streams. This one is an additive mixer, which means that it adds the luminance values together of the two streams. These other ones do various things. You can play with all of these to see which ones you like. They'll do different things according to wherever they are and what kinds of systems you're using. But let's just pop a max one in there. This is the maximum value of the two streams. And you'll see one thing that happened was the little pupil dotted out straight away. Of course, this will also rely on what you do with your sliders here. So you've got your two level inputs, level 1 and level 2. Different effects will happen according to how you mix them together. So let's just go back to our additive mixer. I showed you before how I can create a denser eye socket by just changing the amplitude of the Gaussian dot itself, but I've also put in a filter component here, and this will also allow me to do this. I'll tend to use a filter because you can see we've got much greater latitude on a filter than we do in the Gaussian dot. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this slightly larger. Just make these sockets a bit larger. What I'm trying to do here is I want to just get a bit of contrast between the eyes themselves and the socket, just so I can get it to pop out a little bit more. So just going to make these a little denser here. A little bit hotter on the highlight there. I'm going to be playing around a little bit with this tutorial because a lot of this has got to do with just trying to find a way that something looks better, and of course that just means experimentation. So what I'm going to do is put in another stream. I want to put a little dark pupil in here. So what I've decided to do is to make these little white bits highlights, and I want a dark pupil inside, and you'll see once I do that it'll start to become a lot more realistic looking as an eye. You can keep on making, as much realism as you want. It's just a matter of experimentation and time. So the great thing about ArtMatic is that the number of variations are infinite. So you can more or less do all kinds of great things as long as you've got the patience to keep on playing. So what I did there, you'll probably be familiar now, I just added a packed component at the bottom of each of these RGB components, and then another mixer down here at the bottom. Our Gaussian dots reappeared, this fourth one that I've added. And it's big and white and it's blurred everything out, but I don't want it to be that kind of large, so I'm going to put a scale and offset in here, and I'm going to make it smaller. It's actually going to be quite small for the moment. I'll just leave it there so you can see it, and I'm going to make it quite dark, so it's going to be dark. It's now overlaying everything, but I don't want it to do that. I actually want it to be smaller than the eye, because what I'm doing is I'm making a pupil that goes inside the eye. So now we have essentially three elements. We have the outside element, we have the pupil, and we have the highlight. Well, four actually, including the socket. You notice each time you put something in, according to whatever mixer you're using, it will change the way the elements react with one another. So you probably need to do a bit of playing around to find something that works for you. And they all have very different kinds of effects, the mixers. So it's just a matter of playing till you get something you like, and that's more or less what I'm going for here. Is you can see I've got the color that I put in there. That's the color of the iris, if you like, and then there's the very dark pupil, then there's a little highlight. So that's given us an eye that's slightly more realistic looking there. The eye socket has lost a little bit of its darkness, so I'm just going to darken it just a tiny bit. And the other thing I want to do here is I'm just going to change the shape of the eye socket a little, not quite that much. This is the skew component. I don't want it to be skewed that much. I just don't want the eye socket to be as regular as a circle. Just, again, helps with a little bit more realism. And I could, if I wanted to, add another component in here to change the shape a bit. So let's try this Pearl and Random one again. I'll put the frequency... yeah, I know we like that. Let's have that. That's nice. This is a great thing about working with ArtMatic. You can just accidentally find fantastic results. This component at the top of the tree, as you'll remember, is actually controlling everything here. And what I've decided is that I think the eyes are a little bit too far apart here. So because every other component is now being controlled by this, I'm going to just move the eyes a little bit closer together. Not that close together. One little tip here is if you hold down the Option key while you're dragging these sliders, you get a greater amount of control over what you're doing. It just means that you don't have big jumps in how you're doing things. Okay, so I kind of like those eyes. I think I'll leave them there for the moment. I'm going to go back into the mouth. I'm just going to move the mouth down a little. And I might just also make it a little smaller. So I'm essentially moving the two. You remember that there are two Gaussian dots here and they're just being mirrored across an axis. So that's those two dots. I'm just going to move them a little closer together so that the mouth isn't quite so frowny. And I sort of like that. I think that's quite an interesting little effect that we've got going there. Okay, so that looks like a good progression from where we were before. I'm going to go out to the top of the tree again, and we're just going to look back in this component, and you remember this is what's controlling the top and bottom half of the face. And we talked about the spots displace component before. Now this component alters the space above the Gaussian dot in such a way that it creates sort of shadows and highlights which are random dots in space. And you'll remember that I actually changed the frequency down quite low, and when I move the phase I can get all kinds of wacky things happening. It's basically just sweeping these large displacement areas right across. And you can see you can get some remarkable effects by doing that. So I kind of like that, and I think we'll leave the look there. These components are descriptive components which are really just altering the qualities of the Gaussian dot. You can add all kinds of different things in there to play with. I'll show you. Any 2-in 2-out component is going to have some effect on the spatial characteristics of that dot. I put the ripples in, we get that effect. Remember that these will all work in tandem, so you can get some pretty wacky things going on here. But we're going to keep it fairly simple, and that's our look for the moment. I'll just collapse my tree. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to one of my favorite things about ArtMatic, and that is the ability to create random mutations of an image. Now, the mutation function in ArtMatic is really quite remarkable. You can do all kinds of things with it. In its most extreme, what I just did then, by the way, is I've just unlocked all of the components. These little locks here, which you'll see appear on all components, are designed to lock the parameters out of being mutated. So when they're locked, no mutation can be performed. If we go looking inside our tree, we'll see that everything's unlocked inside the tree. So I'm holding the Shift key down, I'm just clicking on the locks. I can unlock and lock the parameters individually. If I hold the Shift key down, I can toggle between everything being locked and unlocked. And in fact, everything inside that system will be locked and unlocked according to me holding the Shift key down there. So if I don't hold the Shift key down, I can just unlock any one single parameter. If I hold the Shift key down, everything will become locked or unlocked. That will only affect what's going on inside a compiled tree. So if I come back out to the top and unlock everything, I can go into a compiled tree, can lock everything in here, so everything is now locked, and come back out and you'll see the actual tree is all unlocked still. It only affects what's going on in the particular region you're working in. But we want to lock the whole outside tree, and in fact what we will do is we'll go in now and we will lock everything inside each of these compiled trees. So everything inside the compiled trees is now locked. This basically means that I can't mutate anything. So if I invoke the mutation function, which I do by hitting Command F, you'll see I have all the mutation squares and nothing's mutated. Well, the reason for that is everything is locked, so nothing can mutate. I'm going to unlock everything now. Go back in and just unlock everything in each of these components. Because what I want to show you is what happens when I now invoke mutation. So now remember, everything in the system, all parameters of all tiles have now been unlocked. Invoking mutation, you can see immediately that we very rapidly progress into an area which is not very useful for us. We're not interested in purple squares or funny green objects. This is the wildest situation that a system can be in. All parameters inside the system all being mutated completely randomly. Well, there's not a lot of reason that you'd want to do that. So let me just show you how constrained mutation works. Now, the one thing I should tell you is when the outside tree is locked like this and I invoke mutation, I still won't get any mutations, and that's because each of these tiles is locked. So even though the insides are unlocked, the exterior is locked, and that is done with this little lock here. On any one of these, you will see that this parameter slider has no actual utility, but the lock itself locks what's inside. So just for the sake of argument, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to lock everything, so everything inside this tile is locked, but I'm going to unlock the outside, go back in, and the only thing I'm going to unlock is the phase of the noise. You'll remember this controls this gross distortion. So now when I go back out and hit mutate, I get a variation on the things that I just did with that slider. I'm just seeing a whole lot of variations of random phase inside that slider. That one there. So in this whole system, only one thing is being mutated, and it's the phase on that particular component controlling that part of the face. I'm going to lock that again because that's not very useful. I mean, I could use that for something if I wanted, but what I'm going to do is go back into our main body of the face. I'm going to lock everything inside this particular component. I'm just going to unlock the phase of the noise controlling the shapes of the face. So the only thing in this entire system that is now going to mutate are those two tiles and only the phase. Now you remember this is locked at the moment, so I have to unlock that compiled component to allow this to work. And I'm just going to invoke mutation, and straight away you see we have a whole lot of useful different variations on the face that we made before. The only thing that's been changed is the actual shape of the face. So let's just add our original face here, and let's just have a look at some of these. We'll switch off auto mutate just so that we can pick and choose, and we'll add these to our sidebar. This is just so that we can go back out and have a look at all of these. So there's a little bunch of things for us. Let's have a look. So now we've got a variation on face shapes, and you can see how that can be a very, very quick way to get a whole lot of changes without having to physically go through and do all of those changes. The slider up the top here controls the amount of mutation. In other words, the extremeness of the mutation. So if you set it up very high, you get a lot more variation in your faces. Difficult to tell here that there's more variation, but in some systems you'll see there's a very large progression as you go along. If we put this right down the bottom here, you'll see it won't mutate that much. So we get a very slow change from one to the next. There are some very interesting alterations in our original face. Well, you'll have realized that if we can unlock the parameters in one component, we can selectively do that with other components as well. So let's try unlocking the phase parameter of the dots displace component. Now, you remember this sweeps big variations of dots through the Gaussian circle. And we'll go back out again and we'll mutate this system, see what we get. I've got the mutation set very low, but we'll go right up high here. You can see now we're getting considerable changes in our system. We go a long way from what we had before. And each component that I unlock is going to give us even greater changes because they're all cumulative, so they're all adding to the effect. Let me just try something else here. I'll just unlock the component that controls the phase on these eyeshadows, as you remember we put in before. Well, first of all, I have to lock all of the components inside here. Now I'm just going to unlock the phase parameter here. Now this is, oh, it's rather large, so maybe too big for what we want. So let's take the amplitude right down, so these will be smaller changes now. And I might make the circle just a little larger as well, just so they're not quite as dramatic. And let's try mutating now. We don't have to go back out to the top tree to mutate, so as long as we make sure that this component is unlocked, I'm going to try again. Okay, you see now what we're mutating is the shape of the face, the eyes, and sweeping those big Gaussian dots through as well. So we've got some fairly major things going on here. It's creating some fairly wild and wacky alternatives. So we might get something useful out of that. You can see that the style of the face is changing quite dramatically here. And one last thing that I'm going to do is go back into the face and unlock the colors. So we're unlocking the RGB shaders here. So this is going to have very, very large ramifications for the colors when we do the mutate. And there we have it. We've got lots of fairly extreme color changes. Let's put our parameter right down here and see if we can just limit that down a little bit. This is a very good way of getting quick changes. And the last thing I might do is just have a look at these are the parameters that control the eye color. I'm going to unlock those as well. Okay, so we're going, this is very extreme now. We're getting some very extreme changes happening here. But this is a good way of finding some fairly severe differences. The other thing I'm going to do too is I'm going to unlock our phase parameter on this main phase control and also take down a little bit and create a bigger frequency change. Okay, let's try this one more. Probably a little bit too big on the frequency. Okay, so you can see that we're getting some fairly wild faces happening here. It's a very good way of getting some big variations very, very rapidly. So I might leave this tutorial here. You might like to think about how else you could use these kinds of systems and what kinds of other things you could make. All kinds of life forms use symmetry, so you could choose to make, for instance, a full body if you were that ambitious. It wouldn't be that difficult. It's once again just variations on the same kind of theme. That's it for me. I hope that you've found something interesting in these tutorials, and I'd love to see your results posted up on the ArtMatic Facebook and Voyager Facebook page if you can, or elsewhere and link to them. We're always interested in what you're doing with ArtMatic.